Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso and we'll be looking at another discourse from the Buddha. This one is from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4, sutta number 162. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanations. And you can type in questions at any time and I'll respond to them at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, this is a discourse, as mentioned, from the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses. Chapter 4, so this is list of fours, 162, and it's called the Vittara Sutta, which means detailed or in detail. So the discourse begins. This is presumably the Buddha speaking. It says, "Mendicants, there are 4 ways of practice." What for? So the first one, painful practice with slow insight. Second one, painful practice with swift insight. Third one, pleasant practice with slow insight. And the fourth one, pleasant practice with swift insight. So the Buddha continues, he says, what is the painful practice with slow insight? He says, it's when someone is ordinarily full of strong greed, hate, and delusion. And they often feel the pain and depression that greed, hatred, and delusion bring. And he continues, he says, these 5 faculties manifest in them weakly: faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Because of this, they only slowly attain the conditions for ending defilements in the present life. This is called the painful practice with slow insight. So this is the first of the 4. So I'm going to go ahead and read through all 4 of them before speaking a bit about this. But just to briefly comment here, the distinction that the Buddha is making in this discourse is between, again, whether one's practice or one's way of practicing is pleasant or painful. Whether it's dukkha or sukha, so whether it's dukkha-ful or pleasant, and whether one attains full knowledge slowly or quickly. And the Pali word is abhinya. So abhinya, the prefix abhi means superior or higher, and nya means knowing. So abhinya means higher knowledge or superior knowledge. And in the suttas, the term abhinya is often used to indicate specifically full awakening, though it also is used in some contexts to mean other spiritual attainments or developments, but usually it's understood to mean full awakening, as seems to be the case in this sutta, as the Buddha clarifies that it's about arriving at the complete elimination of one's defilements. And so the first case, so painful practice with slow insight, this is, again, the case of somebody who has very strong greed, hatred, and delusion. So raga, dosa, and moha. So raga meaning passion or obsession. And in particular, this is connected with greed. So the desire for pleasant experiences, the pursuit of desirable experiences. And dosa, which is translated here as hate, but dosa has a broader sense. It has the sense of aversion or hostility or negativity towards any kind of experience. So it's not necessarily hatred towards other people, but it's a negative, hostile attitude towards any aspect of one's experience. So including sensations or perceptions or mental objects or emotions or anything that's coming through our field of knowledge. And finally, delusion, so moha. So this often manifests as confusion or as spaciness, or as a tendency to be lost in one's own world, or can also manifest in not really understanding what's going on either in your own mind or in the world around you. Or it can manifest in actually forming wrong ideas and believing in wrong ideas or distorted ideas about things. So these three primary ways that we talk about defilement in the mind. So raga, passion or greed, dosa, aversion, negativity, and moha, confusion, delusion, spaciness. And so in this case, again, it's someone who has very strong defilements, very strong greed, very strong hatred, very strong delusion, and therefore they frequently experience a lot of suffering as a direct result. And furthermore, the Buddha is saying that in this case, the case of painful practice with slow insight, the person also has very weak the five faculties. So the five faculties are saddha. The first one is faith. Saddha, faith or confidence, which elsewhere in the suttas is particularly defined as faith in the enlightenment of the Buddha. So faith that the Buddha was in fact a fully enlightened being who was capable of teaching others the path to awakening, and in fact did so. And the second faculty is virya, which is translated here as energy. So virya more precisely, or more literally, it means heroism. So virya means the qualities of a vira, of a hero. This heroic endeavor to do what needs to be done. This willingness to do whatever it takes in order to accomplish one's goal. So again, this is a critical quality in the spiritual path. So we start with faith that the Buddha was enlightened, fully awakened, perfect wisdom and compassion, and that he taught the Dhamma, which leads to awakening. So with that basis of faith, then we arouse this heroic resolve to do whatever it takes to attain awakening. And this is this quality of virya, this quality which is this resolution to do what must be done. No matter how difficult it is, no matter how challenging it might be, no matter how impossible it might even seem to be at times. No matter how much it goes against our desires or our impulses, we arouse this heroic resolve and we do the practice. We do what needs to be done. And the third of the five spiritual faculties is sati, commonly translated as mindfulness. So the quality of alertness and attentiveness to our experience. And whenever we talk about sati, normally we're talking about the four foundations of mindfulness, the four satipatthana, the four ways of establishing mindfulness. Mindfulness of body, feeling, of mind states, and of mental objects. These four domains of our experience where we cultivate this sharp, clear, precise, present moment awareness. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, it further clarifies that one should be cultivating the perception of impermanence, relinquishment, and non-self in relation to each of these four domains of mindfulness. And the fourth faculty is samadhi, this faculty of concentration or mental unification, collectedness of mind, steadiness of mind. So one of the most important faculties to be cultivating during meditation practice, training the mind to be still, steady, unified, while remaining completely alert, clearly aware. And in many places in the suttas, the Buddha emphasizes that samadhi is a necessary prerequisite for insight, that without strong samadhi, it's impossible to develop deep wisdom. Which is the fifth faculty. The fifth spiritual faculty is panya, what we commonly translate as wisdom, or sometimes it's translated as discernment. So from the same root, nya, as I mentioned, abinya, the root nya means to know. Panya comes from the same root. this root nya, which means to know. The prefix here, actually I won't get into it because it's actually not that helpful in this case. But it's sufficient to know that panya, again, is about a precise knowing, precise understanding. The prefix panya, the prefix indicates towards or to, so it indicates this precision of pointing the mind towards knowing, or knowing, directed knowing, precise knowing. So when these 5 faculties are weak, then it takes a long time to attain awakening, even if one is practicing the path. If one's faith is weak, then one won't be much interested in practicing well or at all. If one lacks this heroic resolve, then one will tend to be lazy in one's practice, which again will slow things down quite a bit. If one's mindfulness is blurry and unclear, then we won't have a very good understanding of our experience, and therefore we won't understand how to practice well. And we won't, since we aren't clearly aware of our experience, it will be impossible to cultivate a wise understanding of it. If our samadhi is weak, if the mind is distracted, spacey, wandering all over the place, or falling asleep, dull and drowsy, agitated, then without good samadhi, then it's very difficult, once again, to know and see things as they are. The Buddha gave the simile of murky water or boiling water to get some understanding of what the mind is like when our samadhi is weak. Whereas when the water is completely still and clear, you can see clearly all the way to the bottom of the pool. This is what it's like when the mind has strong samadhi. So again, a necessary factor for cultivating wisdom. If our samadhi faculty is weak, then it will be very difficult to cultivate the wisdom faculty. And of course, without the strong wisdom faculty, it's impossible to clearly understand the nature of the defilements operating in our own mind, and therefore impossible to eliminate them. So this is why the Buddha says, because of the weakness of these 5 faculties, then it takes a long time to eliminate one's asavas, one's defilements. So this is the case of someone who has painful practice and slow insight. They have a lot of defilements, and their spiritual faculties are very weak. So it's not that such a person can't attain awakening, it's just that it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be a very unpleasant process because of the strength of their defilements. The second case, he says, is the case of painful practice with swift insight. So this is someone who is ordinarily full of strong greed, hatred, and delusion, and often feel the pain and depression brought by greed, hatred, and delusion. But the 5 faculties manifest in them strongly. The Pali word here is adimatta, which means to a high measure, a high degree, an extraordinary amount. And he says, because of this, they swiftly attain the conditions for ending the defilements immediately in the present life. And this is called painful practice with swift insight. So the difference here is that although the person has very strong defilements and is experiencing a lot of dukkha as a result of their strong defilements, they also have strong spiritual faculties. Their faith is strong. Their heroic resolve is strong. Their mindfulness is strong. Their samadhi is strong. And their wisdom is strong. So even though they're experiencing strong defilements and a lot of suffering, because their spiritual faculties are developed to an extraordinary degree, then that doesn't slow them down. They still experience a lot of suffering because of their strong defilements, but the strength of their spiritual faculties carries them swiftly towards awakening. The third kind, he says, is a pleasant practice with slow insight. And the Buddha says this is when someone is not full of strong greed, hatred, and delusion, and therefore they rarely experience the pain and depression brought by greed, hatred, and delusion. However, he says, the 5 faculties manifest in them weakly. So faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom are weak in this person. And because of this, they only slowly attain the conditions for ending the defilements in the present life. This is called pleasant practice with slow insight. So this is the case of somebody who their life is actually pretty decent. Their mind is relatively peaceful. It's not overwhelmed with strong defilements. They don't have a lot of dukkha. So every now and then you meet people like this, people who have this oddly charmed life, angelic life, it's kind of blessed life, where things seem to always be going pretty well for them. They don't really have that many emotional problems or mental issues. They don't seem to be dominated by overpowering impulses. They're pretty clear-minded. And their life is overall pretty pleasant, pretty good. So that might seem like, oh, great. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, in fact, the strength of the 5 spiritual faculties. So in this case, the Buddha is saying, yeah, this person might not have very strong defilements, and they might not be experiencing that much dukkha. But because their 5 spiritual faculties are weak, it still takes them a long time to attain awakening. And then the 4th one, this is the one that we're all hoping for. Pleasant practice with swift insight. The Buddha says this is when someone is not full of strong greed, hatred, and delusion. They rarely feel the pain and depression brought by greed, hatred, and delusion. And the 5 faculties manifest in them to a high degree. So faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And because of this, they swiftly attain the conditions for ending the defilements in the present life. This is called the pleasant practice with swift insight. So this final case is, again, it's ideal. So having a pleasant practice. And why is it pleasant? It's pleasant because our defilements are not overpoweringly strong. This doesn't mean we don't have defilements, because until one attains full awakening, there will always still be some degree of greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. But the defilements we have are not overwhelmingly strong. They're tolerable. And therefore, we don't experience a lot of dukkha directly caused by our defilements. Not that we don't have any dukkha at all, because again, until we're fully awakened, there will still be some measure of dukkha. But once again, it's tolerable. And because we've cultivated our 5 spiritual faculties, our faculties of faith, resolve, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, then we can make swift progress towards full awakening. So that's the end of this sutta. So relatively short, straightforward, and clear discourse. So we can go ahead and respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So hello to the people checking in online. Hello to Richard, Rebecca. I believe it was Rebecca who requested this sutta. So hello to Kim, Richard, Manol, Gita, Tiantong, Maria, Victoria, Karuna, Bhumika, Jody, Rick, Poka, and everyone else who's watching. And we have a couple questions here. So Richard says, is the difficulty and speed of the practice measured as it says in the sutta only applied for Sotapanna until Arhatship? So I don't see this discourse as being restricted in any way to Sotapanna. It seems to be talking about the full path right from the beginning until full awakening. So I don't see any implication about this only applying to stream enterers or anything of that sort. And it definitely talks about the goal as being the elimination of the asavas. So asavanamkaya, the elimination of the asavas, which means full awakening. So I don't think this applies only to stream enterers. I don't see any indication of that in the sutta. And Richard says, is the difficulty and speed of the practice something unchangeable for the present life? For example, Venerable Mahamoggallana didn't have the same practice of Venerable Sariputta in his life. Because the practice of Venerable Mahamoggallana was swift but painful, but the practice of Venerable Sariputta was swift and pleasant. So I would say difficulty and speed of practice are not unchangeable, whether for the present life or otherwise, because we're constantly changing our conditions. So perhaps right now you have the conditions of perhaps painful practice and slow results, but if you work on that, then it'll change. If you make an effort to reduce your defilements, then you'll have less defilement-produced dukkha. If you work on strengthening your spiritual faculties, then your progress will be swifter. So I wouldn't say it's unchangeable for the present life, but I would say that you start where you are. So if you're currently in a condition of painful practice and slow progress, then you need to make an effort to change those conditions. As for the question of Venerable Mahamoggallana and Venerable Sariputta, so they, in fact, were different people with different conditions, different personalities, different challenges, and therefore their way of practicing was different. I remember, and I don't remember if this is in the suttas or the commentaries, so maybe Ayurveda can remind me on this one, but I recall it being said that Venerable Mahamoggallana, his practice was painful in the sense that he was more focused on asubha as a way of developing wisdom, whereas Venerable Sariputta was said to be pleasant because he was more focused on jhana practice. Is that true? Is that from the commentaries?
I think it's from the commentaries.
From the commentaries, okay.
One of the suttas is that Mahamoggallana needed assistance and Sariputta didn't.
Oh, okay.
Like Mahamoggallana needed to be told to do that each step, where Sariputta used his wisdom to figure it out. I think Mahamoggallana was maybe quicker or something. I don't remember.
I recall both of them taking exactly 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. So maybe
So as I recall, they took the same amount of time to attain awakening. So both of them had swift practice. The difference was that Venerable Mahamoggallana had a lot of dukkha during those 2 weeks, whereas Sariputta was apparently cruising along and having a great time. But that's actually an important point in and of itself, which is that, again, the important thing is not necessarily how pleasant one's practice is. The important thing is making progress towards awakening. But generally speaking, if one is practicing well, then one's practice will tend to become increasingly pleasant over time. Because as one continues practicing, then that will tend to shave off more and more of one's defilements. And therefore one will have less and less dukkha as a direct result. Okay, and we have another question here from Rebecca. Rebecca says, does the second type of practitioner experience their defilements as a strong motivation for liberation? This can be the case. In fact, this is often the case with practitioners who, as one starts to develop faith, and one's resolve increases and one becomes more mindful, and one is starting to become more clearly aware of just how much dukkha is directly caused by one's defilements. And there also starts to be the awareness that there is a goal in sight. There is a complete elimination of suffering that is possible. So in one discourse it talks about the depression of the renunciant. Or the depression of the renunciant, it's contrasted to the depression of the householder. The depression of the householder is when they don't get enough sensuality. But the depression of the renunciant is when they think, oh, when will I attain that high spiritual attainment that the noble ones have attained? So it's when you realize that you still have so far to go until you reach awakening. So it's this like, this longing, this painful longing for the complete elimination of defilement. So that is in fact something which can really motivate one on one's path, is when one starts to realize the strength of one's defilements, and one starts to realize how painful those defilements really are. And one starts to form this incredible resolve of like, okay, I really need to do this. I really need to clear out these defilements. I really need to cultivate this wisdom that will bring me beyond. I really need to practice renunciation so I can drop all of these attachments and defilements from the mind. So yes, having strong defilements can actually be a strong motivation for liberation if one has faith in the Buddhist path, if one has faith in liberation. One has faith in the Dhamma that leads to awakening. So there's a discourse where the Buddha actually says, from suffering arises faith. And from suffering arises the spiritual quest, the spiritual search. And it's actually referring to exactly this. So one is noticing this strong dukkha produced by one's defilements, and then that naturally leads one to commit thoroughly to the spiritual path. And Rick says, which of these faculties should be focused on to lessen grief due to the death of a loved one? Well, so the 5 faculties, again, being faith, resolve, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Which one will lessen grief? Regardless of the source of the grief, which one will lessen grief? Well, let's see, if you have faith, so faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, then actually focusing on that faith will bring some solace and comfort to the mind, so that can lessen grief. Resolve, in and of itself, resolve isn't necessarily going to lessen grief, but resolve gives you the dedication and drive to work on diminishing one's defilements and cultivating one's path. So indirectly, resolve will help with lessening grief. Mindfulness, again, isn't necessarily going to directly lessen grief, but it will allow you to cultivate a detached awareness of the emotional experience that's going on, which may then help you cultivate more equanimity. So again, mindfulness not directly, but indirectly may help. Samadhi, absolutely, when the mind is in strong samadhi, then all ordinary dukkha evaporates. And when the mind is in strong samadhi, the defilements are temporarily inactive, which means you won't be experiencing ordinary dukkha. And that would include the dukkha of grief. So yeah, when the mind is in samadhi, then your grief will also be temporarily relieved. And of course, wisdom. The wisdom which sees the impermanent and impersonal nature of the grief experience. That also will naturally lead to the mind letting go. It will naturally lead to renunciation, and therefore for the lessening and elimination of that grief. So I would say all 5 of the faculties actually contribute to lessening grief to one degree or another. But I would say that the faith faculty is particularly important, especially in the beginning when the other faculties are hard to develop. But then as one cultivates mindfulness and resolve, then one can start to diminish the grief a bit through looking on with equanimity. Cultivating samadhi will give you some relief. And finally, through wisdom, one can break through it entirely. And that's the last question online. Any questions from the monastery residents about this sutta? Okay. So maybe that's enough for this evening, and we can conclude at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.